All right, let's briefly review where we left off. If I turn on Canvas here and I turn off my asset holder, we have a background here. And let's make sure that we throw these underneath the asset holder as well. And let's play our game. If I want my settings, I click settings. I can close out my settings. If I want to play my game, I hit start. Looks like that broke for some reason. Let's take a look why. So I'm going to double click my canvas, select start. Yeah, it looks like these did not stay. We might have to make this a prefab, but let's drop this in there. Let's do game object here and then set active. And we want this thing to be active when I press the button. So let's try that one more time. Start, there we go. There's our game. Brings in all of our assets. Now when I move my arrow keys or my WS up and down, you can see that my paddle is moving. The next thing I want to do is script my ball. So let's go ahead and turn off my canvas for a second. Let's turn back on our asset holder. And our sphere here, let's go ahead and name this ball. And in our scripts, we have a player controller. Let's right click and let's just create another C# script. And we're going to call this ball controller. And I'm going to drag my ball controller script on top of the ball. And let's see, inside of art here, let's just double check that took. Yeah, there it is. Here's player 1, player 2. Let's go ahead and create another folder. We'll call this ball. And then I'm going to right click in here, create material. And this will be ball material. Now this should go a little bit smoother because I'm actually recording this on my desktop computer versus my laptop. And sometimes when you're recording and doing audio and you have these really powerful mics and stuff hooked up, it tends to make it chug. So you can probably see that my performance is a lot better. All right, so we got our ball material on here and we can really pick whatever, maybe something that complements it or at least makes it stick out. So there's our green ball. It's starting to look like the Joker's colors. We'll go yellow. Yeah, I think yellow might be a little bit more relaxing then. There's a lot of stuff going on color-wise, and this could make somebody, I don't know. You always want to make sure when you're, and maybe we'll go back and do a pass that makes this look a little bit better. But overall, whenever you're designing your game, you want to make sure color is involved. But for now, we're sort of just learning the basics of scripting, user experience, as well as like really user experience being like, how do we code the entire flow of a game and include some UI? And we do need to include some points in here. But for now, let's go ahead and open up our ball controller script. All right, so there's some stuff that we're going to need. The first thing is we'll probably need, and let's just kind of plan this out. We'll need some speed. We'll need a way to control the speed, right? Just like we did last time. We'll use the velocity like we did with the paddle. We need to set the initial direction. And let's see, what else will we need? Place to reset the ball. Let me hit Control KC to comment that. This needs to be a property or variable, I would say. This one too. And what I generally do is when I'm working on my stuff, I sort of plan it all out like this. When we go to reset the ball, since this is an action and not some information that we're storing, this is going to be a method. And you don't have to write function or method or property. It's just I'm doing that now to sort of explain my thought process. And even if you do, it's not a bad thing. We need to launch the ball. So this will be a method that launches the ball and sets the initial. So we want to reset the ball back to the position if it gets hit or back to somewhere in our scene. And then we want to set the initial position. And I think lastly, we need to adjust, this would also be a method. Adjust the speed of the ball. And I'm going to hold Alt and click my down arrow. Just kind of move this down. I think it does the same thing inside of Visual Studio. So what I know is, let's borrow some code from here. I know we have this guy, this public float speed. So I'm going to paste that in here. And then this is going to have to be a new variable. And this is going to set the initial direction. So what I mean by that, let me save this and return really quickly to Unity. Let that finish compiling. This ball here, we need to fire off right away. So I hit F to focus on the ball. We need to send it in one direction like this, or up and down like this. And so let's go ahead and add let's add a component, and we'll add a rigid body to this because we're going to be needing some physics. And as it hits our paddle, we want it to, we want it to move. There's also something pretty cool. It's called a physics material. So inside this ball thing where there's assets, I'm going to create, and oftentimes if it's a bigger game, your technical director might have a folder just for all the physics stuff and for physics materials. For now, we're just going to put everything in this ball folder, but I'm going to create here, and I'm going to grab a physics material, which is down here. And I'm just going to call this, instead of new, I'm going to do ball. Let's leave it lowercase like the other ones. Ball physics material. And I'll just, so it's this friction, bounce, combine, mini, multiply, and then there's bounciness. If I make this 1, I think that's the ultimate bounciness. I could be wrong, but, or maybe it could go higher. So I'm going to go ahead and shrink this down. And I'm going to drop this in. We add this to our, I think we add this to our sphere collider. Let's see. Here it is, material. Now when I press play, let's take a look at how much this bounces. You can see now it's bouncing like that. Maybe we could go higher. Let me see. Can we go 5? Oh yeah, I guess we could go much higher. Oh no, reset back to 1. Yeah, 1 is the highest. All right, so we've got some bounciness. So as it hits things, it's going to add bounciness. And then we're going to add a little bit of force, because notice that it stops bouncing. And what we'd like this thing to do is keep moving if it hits around. Or we could have it, well, we really want it to just, if it hits here, we want it to keep bouncing, and then this guy will move down. But if it hits this back wall, just like table tennis, if it gets past the guy, or it hits this wall, we want to be able to score a point for the opposite person. All right, so let's go back to Visual Studio Writer. Actually, let's make sure that took. I think I might have been, hopefully I wasn't doing that in play mode. So let's double check our ball here. Yeah, it's still in there. All right, let's jump back to Writer. All right, to save some time, I'm going to just type out what the variable and, all that good stuff that sets the initial direction, or that's going to store the initial direction. All right, so we made it private, so it's not going to show up in our Unity editor. And we made it of type vector3. So remember, what that stores is the X, Y, and Z of our movement, or X, Y, and Z. It's going to store the X, Y, and Z position of the object that this script is attached to. So that's the ball. All right, and if you recall, the start method it's called right away, right? It says like it starts called before the first frame is updated. So that's probably the best place we want to launch our ball, is just put that inside this start method. And these are grayed out because they're currently not being used, which is weird because the update and start method are, I guess maybe because we don't have any code in here. But anyway, let's go ahead and type that out. So I'm going to, we also need, now that I look at it, we need control of the physics. So we need a way to control the physics. And even though control is an action, I'm just sort of looking at it as a property to control the physics. And we've done this before, so let's go ahead and grab that same rigid body code from here to save time. And then we're going to actually access it here. Let's go back to our player controller and grab this here. And let's just paste that in the start method. And you can see that activated now that we have some code running through it. And what we want to do is let's set the initial direction. So this is really once the game starts, we're going to set the initial direction. And I wonder if we should really make this a method that's called when the button is pressed, because what's going to happen is, yeah, you know what? Let's see what happens. I think when we do set active. All right, let me pause this. All right, so what we have is initial direction equals new vector 3, and we have 0, 0, 0 for the x, y, and z. Now, I don't know if I covered this before, but what I'd like to do is make it go randomly on the x, y, and z axis. So the trick that we can use is we can do random dot range. And remember how we were talking about before, you can either subtract one or you can add one. So what this random range is like we want a random number between -1 and then 1. And so on the x-axis, this is going to give us maybe, whatever, 0.5 or, minus 0.5 between this. So let's go ahead and grab this and let's just see how it looks if we paste it in the x, y, and z axis. And then because this is going to give us some, it might give us some sporadic results. We want to normalize the speed or make it all run pretty smoothly. So, and actually, one trick that I like to do when I'm doing this actually is I like to space these out like this just for readability. And it's nice that writer adds an X, Y, and Z in the front. And then at the end here, what you could do is you could do dot normalized. And that'll normalize the number values so that it runs a lot smoother. So let's hit Control S to save this. And let's actually go ahead and let's script the launch function. So I'm going to do launch. Wonder if just like in Visual Studio, sometimes you could just type it out like that and then it'll know to make it. Well, let's try something. So launch. And try to see if there's a shorthand way of create type launch. What if we do this? This is a void method. All right, there we go. Well, it didn't even add the curly braces. All right, so we have a variable. We have a method here, and then this is our method to adjust the speed of the ball. Method to reset the ball. Looks like we forgot to create a method to launch the ball. So it's good I caught this later. All right, so what we can do is we can call this launch method from here. So I'm going to paste this in like that. And so now it should call it, and let's test it. So we're going to go print hello from launch. So let's go ahead and hit Control S to save this. All right, so down at the bottom here, when I press play, let's hit Control Shift and C, or you can go to Window and then General, I believe, Console. All right, and then let's turn these on. I think that's why it didn't work. So let's clear this. And the second the game runs, we get hello from launch. All right, cool. So it is calling it. The second the start runs, it is calling it, but we haven't added any speed yet because remember, we need to, just like in our player controller, we need to set the rigid body's velocity to movement times speed, but not movement times speed. We're going to be setting it to the initial direction that's being created here times the speed value that we created up here, which was 0.5. And we don't know how fast that is. So, oops, it looks like something happened. There we go. I have a new mechanical keyboard and it's pretty touchy. So let's go ahead and copy this line of code. And inside of launch, the whole point of launch here is really this. So let's grab initial direction, which remember is a public variable. It's all the way up here. And then we're going to multiply that by speed. And we don't really have to change it because they have two of the same name variables. And just so you know, good naming should be, like if I hit Control R here, It shouldn't just be speed, it should be ball speed. And I'm going to hit next, and then that should rename it down here. And then the player controller here, and I'm not going to change this because I don't want to mess anything up, especially if you're new to all this. This should be paddle speed. So that was kind of bad naming on my part. So let's go ahead and hit Control S to save this. Let's go back to Unity and see what happens. Actually, I just realized something. We are we're simulating a 2D game in 3D, so there shouldn't be a random range here on Z. Because what would happen is, I'm going to save this for a second. We want our ball to move in the X. See the X up here moving, and the Y axis. But if we move it on the Z axis, we could lose it. So let's see what happens when we press play with. There we go. There's our ball. It doesn't look like it's constantly moving. So let's see what happens if we add well, let's remove gravity. Let's press play. Looks like it's constantly moving. But there's not enough X there, I guess. Oh, it's not constantly moving. So what's going on here? Let's see. Here's our ball. Where's our ball script? Let's change this to 10 maybe. There we go. You know what it is? We definitely need to script out the method to adjust the speed of the ball. So like not just launching it, but one that adjusts speed and it keeps it just constantly flowing with, like it just keeps constantly sending information to the ball as it hits things. All right, so let's go ahead and adjust this update function because we're not going to be using it to a function called adjust speed. And I want to pass in a value. And this is going to be maybe based on like the paddle, it increases the amount of speed, or if it hits the wall. Let me go ahead and type this out, and then let me pause the video and I'll type it out so that we could look at it in a second. All right, so what we have here is we have ball speed, and it's the same. We're adding amount to ball speed every time we call this function, which is adjust speed. And we're going to write a collision function in a second that calls this every time it bumps into the floor or paddle. And then we're going to let that control how much the amount can be. So anyway, here's ball speed plus equals amount. And what we're doing here is we're grabbing that velocity component, we're normalizing it so it's a consistent rate, and we're multiplying it times ball speed. So what we can do is this is what launches it, this is what adjusts the speed, and let's, right above this, let's go ahead and create a way to check if we're bumping into stuff. Bumping into the wall or paddle. All right, so let's take a look at this code. Now, what happens is I made a new variable or a new property appear, and this is what, adjusts the speed after the bounce. And you want to be pretty descriptive when you're creating variables. There's some studios you're going to work at where they don't even use comments, they just use descriptive names for variables. And down in here, what we're doing is this checks if anything has a collision object on it, the ground, the walls, or whatever. So what we went ahead and did is if our game object has the tag paddle, which we're going to tag our paddle, we're going to add speed to it. Right now we only have 0.5 in here. We're gonna probably, maybe we'll have to crank that up. I'm not sure until we actually get into it. And then if we have a game object that has a tag that says wall, we're gonna add speed to it. Now you could break this into multiple if statements, or you could also embed this inside of your paddle or your ball. But I want all of the ball movement and code to sort of be contained within here. But maybe we'll look at both ways if there's time. All right, so let's return to Unity really quick and let's add the tags to our paddle and our wall. All right, so here's our one paddle, and I'm going to do add tag, and I'm going to add a paddle here. Or I'm going to add a paddle tag. So that doesn't essentially, just because you click on add tag, it doesn't necessarily add it when you create a tag. So you have to go back in and select each one and name it paddle. And then I'm not going to do this for these two walls because these are going to be tagged side walls or something. And once the ball hits it, it's going to probably reset the position of the ball. So let's select these two, and I'm going to go to add tag, and I'm going to add a tag here called wall. And I'm trying to make sure that I name it the same as in my code. So if you select both and you change it that way, it's another way of like getting it to take. And as I mentioned, let's see, it's paddle with a capital P and wall. So let's hit Control S. Let's test this. So I'm going to hit play. You can see, boom, it keeps moving faster and faster. It bothers me that you know what I might do, to be honest with you? I don't know if I like this Y stuff, where I set the initial direction randomly to Y. I think it's messing it up. So I'm just going to set this to 0, and I always want it to give me -1 to 1. Let's see what happens here. Let's save this. Let's press play here. Yeah, it's not. Maybe we'll turn on gravity. What the heck? I can't see it hurting anything. You know what? The problem with this is if the random range is -1 to 1, it takes into account. Let's try something. Maybe not a random range. Maybe it always just starts off heading in one direction. Let's do 1 on X. Let's go nuts. Ooh, look at all that. Yeah, because we're adding that force. See how it like really bounces it up? But it is attacking that paddle. All right, so let's actually let's see what happens if we take off gravity. Let's take that off. It's still probably gonna. And then this guy, we need to. There's a couple ways that we could do this. We need to freeze its position. So let's freeze its X, Y, and Z position. Let's see if that. No, it still does it. We should give it. Maybe we can give it some mass. I don't know. Let's do 50. Let's see if that makes it like a solid. There we go. Oh, it's still kind of. All right, and then let's do a lot of mass, and let's lock its position so it doesn't. I think we want to lock its rotation, actually. Let's try that. See if that takes care of everything. There we go. Yeah, look at that. Mm. It's looking pretty good. I mean, there's always some bugs and stuff that we have to fix. All right, let's just do our last method. This video is getting very long, and we'll come back. All right, so the couple things really quick. So the reset ball thing, this is going to give us some issues, but it's not going to be in the code. We're going to have to fix it. I mean, it's going to be in the code, but I just want to show you something. So what I added is I added an else if. So that means if this condition isn't true, it automatically tests this one. And what it's checking is if the game objects in the scene are called B wall, we're going to reset the ball, right? And then within that ball reset, what we're going to do is we're going to reset the ball or call the reset ball function, which is down here. And that's going to set the speed of our ball just temporarily to 0 because we don't want it to pass through the wall. We want it to stop, and then we're going to set its current position to 0, 0, 0 in the world. Now, this is going to give us trouble, and I'll show you why in a second. It has to do with the way we parent and child our objects. And then we're just adding some speed back in to get it moving, and then we call the launch method, which is, if you remember, this is what makes our ball move. So let's see what the error or what's going to happen. So I'm going to press play here. I'm just going to move my ball down so that it could, or move my paddle. And notice that out here, it it jumped back here onto 000 because this is actually 000 in our world. But you might be wondering, well, isn't our ball listed at almost 000 here, right? Well, it's not really. It's taking into account its parent's position. So notice that the asset holder here is set at -7 here, right? So actually, if we go 0 here, now it's set to 0 in the world, right? Because this was off a little bit. So you have to make sure this is set to 000. We could even set the y-axis to 0 like that, and then just grab our camera and move this down like that. So now when we press play, it should, in theory, always stay inside of there. So now we get a little bit of force. Boom, it's adding force, and boom. And don't forget that I also tagged these two here as B-wall. So that's why it's resetting back to the center. I know this is a 30-minute video. It's a pretty long one. But anyway, good job. And we're almost done with this. We need to set up the score and then a little bit of AI for this guy right here.